Okay, so I want to especially welcome everyone joining this call. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us from. I want to welcome you to the Ninja Security User Group. So we are having our bi-weekly cloud security virtual trainings every month. And today we are talking on a topic that is called implement security for private access. It's actually a very important topic because security is one of the most important things that we need to consider in our organization, because if there's any security breach, there will be a very big issue. And our speaker for today is no other person than Stephen Osonuga and the moderator, Emmanuel Oyimafu, which I'm the one on the mic right now. And the event is stated for today. So basically, before I bring the speaker up, I would like to just say some few things about the speaker. So our speaker today is the person of Stephen Osonuga. So Stephen Osonuga is known as the 001 of cybersecurity. So when you see 001, it's really the 001 because like this guy loves cybersecurity and he has passion for cybersecurity. And he's also a dynamic cybersecurity analyst and a cloud engineer, all rounder. And is widely recognized as the cyber preacher. So he preaches cybersecurity everywhere. Even today, which is weekend, is also preaching cybersecurity. And also he has some certification, including Microsoft certified certification 6 times, Microsoft Azure, and he brings a wealth of expertise in vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, as well as hands-on experience across Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Service platform. So Stephen is a dynamic, is a passionate speaker and AI enthusiast. So he's not also just interested in cybersecurity. He's also someone that has interest in AI that is currently trending now. And he's also committed to leveraging his skills to ensure a safer and more secure cyberspace for all. I want us to appreciate our speaker for today as I pass the microphone to him so he can just take over the section. Thank you very much, Steve. You have the stage.
Thank you so much. It is always a privilege to be able to present in this Microsoft Security User Group. And like always, we keep on learning every day. We keep on learning, we keep on adding to our knowledge, right? So let me just share my screen as Mr. Emmanuel has done justice to the introduction. Okay, I'm coming. Please, if you can see my screen, you can just do it to signify. If you can see my screen, do it to signify. All right,
I
beautiful,
can see your screen.
beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so today is another day to implement security in the cloud. And today we'll be looking at planning and implementing private access in Azure. And yes, so that's a little about me. Now, for today, we'll be looking at these four categories when it comes to private access. We'll be looking at how to plan and implement virtual network service endpoints. We'll understand what is a private endpoint. We're going to talk about network integration for Azure App Service and App Function, and Azure Function rather. Then also look at security configuration for App Service environment. So the goal of this training is that this training aims to provide participants with knowledge and skill necessary to design, implement, and manage a comprehensive security strategy for private access to Azure resource. And participants, which is you guys, will be able to secure critical data and application effectively, ensuring that only authorized users and system can access them and maintain the integrity of the Azure network environment. All right, if you're with me so far, can I see a reaction? All right, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So First thing on the list is, what is a virtual network service endpoint? If for those that have done the probably AZ500, you should have come across the service endpoint, the virtual network service endpoint. Now, which is VNet, virtual network service endpoint provides secure and direct connectivity to Azure services over an optimized route over the Azure backbone network. Okay, so basically, these service endpoints, I wish I could annotate on the screen. So basically, this service endpoint, what it does is that it creates like a secure environment, or I won't call it secure, or I'll call it like a safe environment for you to interact with a particular Azure service in your environment. So basically, I'll break it down. When it comes to service endpoints, okay, um, the issue is that anytime we want to have access to our services, such as our Microsoft storage or our maybe firewall and other things, they are routable over the internet. And sometimes companies won't want to allow external access or external access points into the particular service. And so they want it to be that Microsoft allows their company to connect to their particular service through the backbone, that is through the through Microsoft backbone network. So it's like an internal connection direct to the particular service. So companies don't want it that when they want to connect to their service, they don't go through the front end, through the front door, that's through the public IP of the particular service, or for example, through the front IP of the storage. So they want a private, more secure network. And so that is where the service endpoint stem from. So Microsoft utilized their internal backbone, that is their internal network, to route companies, users to their particular storage through what we call the service endpoint. Now, some benefit of the service endpoint include that it provides improved security for service resources. And secondly, is that it provides optimal routing for traffic from your virtual network. Thirdly, is that it's simple to set up actually and also provide less management overhead. So when you configure your service endpoint, basically you just like configure the rule that okay, this storage is not available from outside the network, but it can only be accessed through this particular VNet that has a service endpoint enabled. And so whatever device, VM, app service that is in that particular VNet, they can communicate with the storage through the endpoint. So that's basically what the service endpoint means. Then some of the limitation includes that it is limited to virtual network deployed through the ARM template. So you need to use the ARM model or the deployment model to deploy the VNet. The secondly is that endpoints are not available to on-prem traffic. So, so any if your company is using an on-prem, system and they want to have a secure service endpoint to your storage in the cloud, it is not available because basically the service endpoint utilizes the Microsoft backbone. So that means that it has to be VMs or app service that are in the Azure in the cloud that have access to the service endpoint. But when it comes to on-prem, you have to use other provision like a proxy to have access to these storage. Then thirdly is that for Azure SQL, service endpoint applies only to Azure service traffic within the VNet region. And so basically, the endpoint allows you to secure your critical Azure service resource to only your virtual network, right? So the keyword is only your virtual networks, like the devices inside that can have access to the resources. Service endpoint enables private IP addresses in the VNet to reach the endpoint of an Azure service without needing a public IP address on the VNet. Sure, that makes sense. So Microsoft recommend use of Azure private links and private endpoints for secure and private access to services hosted on the Azure platform. And the Azure private link provisions a network interface into the virtual network of your choosing for Azure services such as the storage or the SQL. Now, secure Azure service access from your on-prem. Now, when it comes to your on-prem, you have to make use of the Microsoft peering, to pair with your with the um, what do you call it? The Microsoft Azure, right? So by default, Azure Service Resources secured, Azure Services resources secured to virtual network are not reachable from the on-prem network, like I said. And if you want to allow traffic from on-prem, you must allow public IP address from your on-prem, or you might use express route to connect. Express route is VPN that allows you to connect your on-prem to the cloud. So service endpoint is limited to the cloud only, while from the on-prem you need to make use of the public IP address of the service or use express routes. Then you can add this IP address through the IP firewall configuration of the Azure service resource. Okay, so this is just the diagram that the endpoint on the left, we can see that the virtual machine is in a particular subnet and subnet is in a VNet. So that subnet has the service endpoint enabled for the storage. And so that means that the virtual machine can have a secure access to the storage. That is an internal access to the storage through the endpoint. And so that provides, but now that Azure storage does not have internet access. Okay. And so, which means that on-prem device has to make use of peering or express routes to connect to the storage. Okay, so moving on. Now, private endpoint. Private endpoint is a network interface that uses a private IP address from your virtual network. And this network interface connects you privately and securely to a service that is powered by Azure Private Link. By enabling a private endpoint, you are bringing the service into your virtual network. Um, Now, private endpoint and service endpoint might sound similar because they are creating a secure private access to a particular service, and so what is actually differentiating it? Now, you see, when it comes to private endpoint, this create a network interface that uses a private IP address, in your virtual network. While service endpoint is attached to a virtual network. Service endpoint does not create a network interface that can be attached. So it is attached to the whole subnet of that VNet. And so whatever device that is in that subnet that has the service endpoint will be allowed for private access. Whereas in private endpoint, it creates a network interface that you can attach to a particular service like your VM or your app, right? And so that particular app has a secure access to your storage or to the service that you provide the private endpoint for. Okay, so the major difference is that service endpoint is on the subnet level, while private endpoint is on the network interface level. So I know network interface can be attached to a PC, can be attached, so that's the major difference. So private endpoint is like a one-to-one connection, while service endpoint is like a many-to-one connection. Now, the services in private endpoints could be an Azure service such as the Azure Storage, the Azure Cosmos DB, the Azure SQL database. So basically, all these services that supports private endpoints, they are somehow in a way critical let's say service now, for example. Now, Cosmos DB contains database. The SQL DB contains database as well. So when you want for example, when you want your sysadmin, sorry, I don't think they call it, your cloud, storage admin to want to have a secure access to a particular database and should remove everybody out. So you can create a private endpoint. So that creates like a secure, connection from your cloud admin to the particular database. But when that's to do with a group of subnet, like a group of device having a secure connection, like a group now, for example, like maybe the marketing department, right? The marketing subnet. So all of them have access to a particular service, to a particular storage. So that is service endpoint. So then also you could also use private endpoint for your own service using the private link service. So one thing that I should add is that the service endpoint actually comes at no cost, but the private endpoint comes with some additional cost, which can be found in the documentation on how many users that you are bringing into. So depending on the number of users, the cost would increase. So that is a major thing around them. All right, now access to private link resource using approval workflow. When you use private endpoints, traffic is secured to a private link resource. The platform validates network connections, allowing only those that reach the specified private link resources. To access more sub-resources within the same Azure service, more private endpoints with corresponding targets are required. And in the case of an Azure storage, for instance, you would need separate private endpoints to access the file and blob sub-resources. Now, private endpoints provide a privately accessible IP address for the Azure service, but do not necessarily restrict public network access to it. Now, all other Azure services require additional access control. However, this control provides an extra network security layer to your resources, providing protection that help prevent access to the Azure service associated with the private link resource. Private endpoint supports network policy, and network policy enables support for network security group, right? And also supports policy for user-defined routes and also application security group. Over a private endpoint connection, a private link owner can, number one, review all private endpoint connection detail. Number two, could approve and can approve or a private endpoint connection. So if you can look on the screen, this is a Azure platform as a service, connect that's trying to connect through private endpoints. The logo by the left is the logo for private endpoints, right? So if you want to connect, so this is basically like the approval of Azure platform as a service. So the first thing is the supported service for private link. Once you have the SQL database, your Cosmos DB. Second is to go to your private endpoint and then create a private endpoint by specifying the service resource URI, and your own past service resource are listed automatically based on the RBAC permission. Then that particular request is sent to the provider side for approval. And if RBAC permission exists, it is automatically approved. Then, so on the right, the the request is approved or rejected, and no action is required if RBAC permission exists. Then the decision is now sent to the service consumer that the connection is either approved or rejected, and then you then finally configure your DNS record for easy access using the private IP address of the private endpoint. So this is just basically the workflow that goes through when you try to create a private endpoint to your platform as a service resource. Now, private endpoint is available to um, platform as a service and software as a service, as the case may be. But when it comes to infrastructure as a service, it is important to make use of the private link, because that comes with some proxy connection. Because private endpoint gives like a internal um, virtual network connection. But when it comes to infrastructure as a service, that means that you're trying to connect one infrastructure as a service to another. So that it is private link that is recommended for that offering. Now, permissions of private link owner. So over a private endpoint connection, a private link resource owner can, number one, review all private endpoint connection detail. Secondly, approve a private endpoint connection. Third, can reject a private endpoint connection. And lastly, can delete. So first is to review, second is to approve or reject, and last is to delete a private connection. So these are the permission of a private link owner. If you're listening so far, can I see a reaction? If you're active, can I see a reaction? Okay. All right. Beautiful. 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 Now, this is a diagram of implementing private link service. And now, Azure Private Link Service is the reference to your own service that is powered by Azure Private Link. Your service that is running behind the Azure standard load balancers can be enabled for private link access so that consumer to your service can access it privately from their own VNet. So your customer can create a private endpoint inside their VNet and map it to this service. So this example explains concepts related to the service provider side. Now, I talked about if you want to perform a IAS connecting to an IAS, right? So you make use of the private link service. Now, on the left hand side, we can see that the on-premise uses an express route pairing to connect to their cloud, right? So then from using the express route gateway, they're able to have access to the private endpoint on their side. But now, if the private endpoint needs to be connected to um, another tenant or another subscription in another tenant, they need to make use of the Azure private link so that Microsoft would make use of would carry the traffic over the network into another tenant, basically. So you know what the tenant means. The tenant is like your it is basically your you let's say the company's accounts or the company's environment. So that is the tenant. So if you want to have a secure access into another company's private link service, you should make use of the Azure private link. And so this is on the infrastructure at the service level. Now, the workflow when it comes to the Azure private link, the workflow. Now, first thing first is that you should create a private link service, right? So in your portal, you should see something. You should see the private link service, and then you should create. So while creating, you configure your application to run behind a standard load balancer in your virtual network. And if you already have your application configured behind the load balancer, then you can actually skip this step. But the first thing is to configure your app that you create. In our last, I think, 3 class or 2 class, we talked about enterprise application. So where we looked at creating an application. So once you've created your application, you need to configure it behind a standard load balancer. Now, after you've configured it behind the standard load balancer, you then need to go ahead and create a private link service referencing the load balancer above. So in the load balancer selection process, choose the front end IP address or IP configuration where you want to receive the traffic. So you choose a subnet for NAT IP address for the private link service, and it is recommended to have at least 8 NAT IP address available in your subnet. And all consumer traffic will appear to originate from this pool of private IP address to the service provider. Right. So once you've configured your app to run behind the standard load balancer, then you need to create a private link and attach it to the front end IP of the load balancer. Okay, so it is that. So it is once you attach it to the front end of the IP load balancer, it is the load balancer that knows which application that is inside that needs to be referenced. Okay. Then thirdly is that after you've created the private link service, Azure will generate a globally unique name, moniker called alias. Sorry, so this can you mute your mic? Okay. So thirdly, the Azure will create a global unique name, and it will give you like an alias, and so that alias will be shared with your consumer. So you can either share it offline or advertise it publicly. So once that is shared, then you can now create number four, create a private endpoint by specifying the private link service. So after a consumer initiates a connection, the service provider can accept or reject the connection request, and all connection requests will be listed under the private endpoint connection property on the private link service. Then you can then go ahead and configure your DNS record for easy access using the private IP address, and then uh, the the old private link is set up. So when it comes to private link, it is how do I put it? It's from a tenant to another, and so this is how it is configured when you want to do that. So that is just basically the workflow for the private link. Now, um, network integration for app service, for Azure App Service and function. Apps in the app service. I hope you guys know what the app service is. So app service allows you to deploy web application and app and app services. So apps or application in the app service are hosted on worker roles. Virtual network integration works by mounting virtual interfaces to the worker roles with addresses in the delegated subnet. And the virtual interface used aren't resources customer have direct access to, because the from address is in your virtual network, and it can access most things in or through your virtual network, like a VM in your virtual network would. So basically, the apps that are in your app service, it said that they have what we call, they are hosted on a worker role. So you know what a role is, right? And so virtual network integration works by mounting those virtual interface to the worker role with address in the delegated subnet. And so that is what allows the app service to communicate with the integrated subnet, and back and forth. Okay, this is not meant to be part. Lastly, we have the Azure App Service environment. Now, we just looked at the Azure App Service. Now we have another thing called the Azure App Service environment. Okay, so basically, in basic form, the app service environment is an environment to create and use app services with network isolation at higher scale. And we call this app service environment the app service environment version 3. which is ASE version 3 as well. So, but you can also call it as ASV3 if you want to. Now, the access environment allows you to deploy. So it is deployed. Sorry, how do I put it now? When you deploy your the AppSafe environment, it comes with a virtual network. So, or it is deployed to your virtual network and also like isolate it from other virtual networks. So basically, the AppSafe environment comes with network isolation in play. So it's once you have your virtual network, once you deploy it there, it's isolated from other network, and so it has up to 100 apps per app service plan with a 200 maximum of app service environment. And it's also have the support of dedicated hardware, so you can dedicate it to a particular hardware. And basically, it provides security plus isolation in mind when creating the app service environment. Now, why should you use app service environment when we have the normal Azure app service? Now, apps deployed to the app service environment are secure in private virtual network out of the box. So they are secured by default. They are isolated by default. And apps don't share Azure infrastructure, giving you complete isolation. Then compliance and security audits are made easy, even when they use it with a dedicated hardware. So these are the benefit of the Azure App Service environment. So when do you need to use App Service environment? So if your top priority for apps is security and isolation, then use App Service environment. But if it is not security and isolation, then you can just make use of the public app service multi-tenant offering, which is faster and cheaper. The app service environment can be more costly because of the isolation and the dedicated hardware support. So if you are with me so far, can I get another reaction? So now we'll be checking our knowledge. We'll be checking our knowledge. What have you learned so far? So a company wants to route traffic for their custom containers through virtual network integration. What must they ensure is configured in addition to the routing setting? A. Any firewall or NSG configured on the traffic from the subnet allow traffic to ports 443 and 445, or 2, database backup is supported over the virtual network integration. 3, firewall or NSG configured on the traffic from the subnet allows traffic to port 80 and 443. So which do you think they must ensure to configure in addition to the routing? Do well to drop your answers in the comments. Do well to drop your answers in the comments if you have an idea. Okay, so some people are saying A, C, A, C. The company wants to route traffic for their custom container through the virtual network integration. What must they ensure is configured in addition to the routing? You need to configure any firewall and NSG on the traffic from the subnet allow traffic to port 443 or 445, or they need firewall or energy configured on traffic from subnet allow traffic to port 80 and 443. There's no D. Who is saying D? There's no option D. It's only three options. I think this is relating to energy that we did in the last class. All right. So the answer, one moment. Okay, so the answer for number one is A. Into what must they ensure is configured in addition to the routing setting? Any firewall or network security group configured on traffic from the subnet allow traffic to port 443 and 445. Then question number two, a company wants to deploy a web application on Azure. They want to ensure that the application is highly available and can handle sudden spike in traffic. Which of the following Azure services should they use? They want to deploy a web application on Azure and they want to ensure that the application is highly available and can handle sudden spikes in traffic. Which of the following Azure app service should they use? Is this for question two? A company wants to deploy a web application on Azure and they want to ensure that the application is highly available and can handle sudden spike in traffic. Which of the following Azure services should they use? Hmm, okay. Some are saying B, some are saying A. All right, so the answer to this is A, Azure App Service. Now, in as much as you can create a virtual machine and it can allow you to host a web application, when it comes to making it highly available to handle sudden spike in traffic, it is recommended to make use of the app service because the app service allow you to deploy a web application or a web app or an app service. So that can handle sudden spike and it has a load balancing to load balance whatever resource that is coming to it. So in summary, we've looked at the what do we call it now? Understanding the service endpoint, private endpoint, and also looking at the app service and Azure function. So now let's just quickly go into the lab and practicalize this, the difference between the service endpoint and the private endpoint. Let's go to the lab. I'm coming, I'll share my environment now. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, beautiful. So we are back to using the Azure environment. So this is the Microsoft portal, and we'll be demonstrating how to use and how to create and use the service endpoint and the private endpoint. Okay. So now, like I said, the service endpoint allows you to allows a subnet to have access or a secure private access to a particular resource. Okay. Wait, can you see my mouse? Sorry, question. Can you see
Proceed.
my mouse? Can you see the mouse?
Yeah, no, I can't see your mouse now.
No, your mouse is not visible.
Oh, okay. Sorry, one moment. How about now?
Yes, it's visible.
I can see your mouse.
Oh, and I've been demonstrating a lot on my screen. I thought you guys will see my mouse. Okay, it's fine. So, a service endpoint allows you to connect like a subnet that allows you to have a secure access from a subnet to a particular resource. Okay. So now the first thing that we need to do is to create a virtual network. And how do we do that? We'll click on virtual network, or you can search for the virtual network. So you can search for it and then open the virtual network. And then we're going to come ahead and create a virtual network. Now you need to make sure that you are using the right subscription and then choose your resource group. But if you don't have a resource group yet, you can just go ahead and create a new resource group and then give it the name, and all your resources will be deployed there. Then next, you need to give the name of what the virtual network is going to be. Let me just say service. Okay, spaces are not allowed. Service endpoint VNet. I'm going to leave the region as East US. Now click on next. I'm going to leave all this as disabled. The encryption, bastion, firewall, and AWS. I'll click on next. Now this has created okay, so this is going to allow to create this address space of 10.0.0.0 only/16, which allows 65,536 IP address. And it's going to create a subnet called default on this smart network, but I'm going to edit this subnet. I'll edit it and then change the name to, let's say, public. Okay, then it's going to create the subnet on a 10.0.0/24. I'll leave that as it is and I'll click on save. Then next tag, I'm not adding any tag for now, so I'm going to review and create. Then it might take a while to validate. Then I will be able to create the virtual network. Now, once we have our virtual network in place, The next thing that we need to do is to, we created a default subnet, a subnet with no requirement, which is the public subnet. Let's say we want to put all other users on the public subnet, right? So we are going to put them there. But now, if we want to have like a private endpoint, we need a separate subnet, or if we want to create a service endpoint, we might want to use a separate and it's a separate subnet, but we can still at the same time use the same subnet. So if the resource is still deploying, all right, so it is done deploying, and now we can go to resource. Now this is the overview of the virtual network. Now there is no VM connected to it, there is no service connected to this virtual network, just the virtual network and the default subnet that came with it. Now, under the settings, if you click on subnet, we see that we have only one subnet. Let's create another subnet here called private. So we'll name this as private. We're going to leave this, so it is going to create 10.0.1 address space. And then if we scroll down, we should see something called service endpoint. Okay, now this allows us to create service endpoint policy to allow traffic to specific Azure resource from your virtual network over the service endpoint. So once we assign this to a service endpoint, this particular subnet is tagged as a service endpoint that can be allowed for a secure access to a resource. Now, from the list, we can see that we have a lot of service endpoint, but I'm going to select the Microsoft storage. So this creates a service endpoint that can be attached to Microsoft storage. That is our storage account. Then I'll leave the rest as default and then click on add. So once you add that, it creates the subnet private with a service endpoint attached to it, a service endpoint of the Microsoft storage. Now on the left also, if you look at service endpoint as well, we could also create a service endpoint or attach a service endpoint to a particular subnet. So let's click on Microsoft storage here on this policy. Okay, so let's leave this as default, but on this subnet, the private already has a service endpoint, but if I want to give the public subnet as a to become a service endpoint, I can click on this. But I'm not going to click on this for this demonstration. Then okay, I will discard this. Now, but for the private endpoint now, this don't have any option to add or remove because private endpoint has to be manually added to a particular service like the Azure storage or the Cosmos DB or the SQL database. So, like I said, all this is for a secure remote access. So, if you're working in your company and they want a secure access to a service, you know that service endpoint or private endpoint is the way to go. Now that we have our service endpoint VNet created and our endpoint enabled. Now let's go ahead and create a storage account. So you can search for storage accounts or you can come to the left hand side over here and then click on storage accounts. Then you click on create. All right, so ensure that the right subscription is selected, then the resource group as well. Ensure that you are using the right resource group. Now, we need to create a unique, globally identifiable storage account. So because this storage account can be, it is a global access, like everyone in Azure needs is a unique address. So that's why this name has been taken already. I already have a storage account that has this name, and even if I'm not the one that have it, if someone else has it, I can't take this name. For example, I think I say storage or something. I don't think. All right, so the name is taken already, and I'm not the one who has this name taking. That's be globally unique. So when creating your storage accounts, you might want to do it to add like a number to the back of it to make sure that it is unique. And so there is no error message now given under it. Okay. Region is going to be East US. I'm not going to add any primary service. I'm just going to leave this. Performance is standard and the redundancy is going to be local. This is the lowest cost option. So we're going to create that. We'll click on next. This is the advanced. We'll click on networking now. So in this networking, we could want to have some settings, but I'm just going to leave this as default. And I'll just review and create. So we'll come back to configuring service endpoint and private endpoint. But let us say we have our storage account already created. How do we secure it using service endpoint and private endpoint? So we'll wait for this to create. Please ensure that you write your questions down if you have any question so that they'll be attended to. All right, so the resource has been created. Now let's go to resource. Now this is our storage account, right? So this by default has by default the networking setting allows every it allows incoming connection from all network, right? And so this can also be insecure. This can be insecure for our company. So now we want to make use of service endpoint. So before we enter into service endpoint, let us upload a particular blob or a file to the storage so that we'll try and see if we can access it when there is a security in place. So how do we upload a file or a blob to this storage? We'll come to data storage here, and then we'll come over to container. Then here we're going to create a new container. So container is like a folder that holds files. Okay, we could call this private. Now, as you can see here, it tells us that we can't change this anonymous access level. Now, in recent time, Azure had upgraded their security that we have to manually allow public access, to have access to blob, and so we are going to be needing this public access if we want to move forward. So to enable public access, we'll come down to settings, we'll come to configuration. Let's discard this for now. Then under allow blob anonymous access, we need to enable this. Okay, so once we enable that, we're going to click on save, and we should just give it about 1 minute to refresh, and we should be able to create or upload our file that can be accessed to the storage. I'll refresh this. Still showing this. So let me refresh the portal. All right, so now I can create my, let's say, private. So I want the content of this container to be private. So I'm going to still click on blob. So I want public access, but to blob alone. So users can read files in this container, but they cannot access the entire container. So this is just the blob access. And then I'm going to click on create. So now we have our container created, which is private. I'll click on this private, and so in this container now I can now upload a file inside that can be accessed, globally. So I'll upload any file that I want to have. Let's say Tor. This is a private file. Then I'll upload it. Okay, so we have a file uploaded, and if you click on this file comes with what we call a URL. Now, let me copy this. Then I'll open a new tab and paste this URL. Notice the URL contains the name of the blob, sorry, of the container, and then the name of the blob file. So if I press enter, there is no security, so I can view this file through the public URL. So that's part of why Azure recommend that, or they say that when you're creating a new storage account, you need to make it unique because your storage account name is here, then the blob call this, then your container, and then the name of your blob file is here. So that is just basically it. Now we don't want it to be that people outside should be able to have access to this file, and we want to create a service endpoint that lets VMs in this VNet that is connected to the storage account only have access to it, and we don't want any other person to have access to it. So how do we go about that? We come back to our Azure portal. Okay, we go back to our storage account. Now in storage account, we're going to security plus networking, and then we're going to click on networking. Okay, so first we want that the public access should be from selected. Now this is for service endpoints from selected virtual network and IP address. So I'm going to add existing virtual network. So I'm going to click on the virtual network that I just created. I think it is this one, right? Service endpoint VNet, which is in my resource group. Then now it's asking for the subnet that I need to attach it to. If I click on subnet, it tells me that for the public subnet, it says service endpoint is required before I can use the public. It then gives me that I have to enable the service endpoint. But I already have a subnet that has the service endpoint enabled already. So I'm going to click on just the private and then click on add. So now it has been added already. Okay, it has been added. I'll refresh this just to confirm. So only wait on this. Sorry, let me do it again. Add existing service endpoint, private, then add, then save rather. So you need to save it so that it gets saved to the storage account. All right, so it has been saved. So if I should refresh it now, it is there. So now if I should now come back to this browser and try to have access to it now, notice what it is saying. It says authorization failure. The request is not authorized to perform this operation. Requested. So now I don't have access to it. Now that means that it is only devices that are inside the VM that can have access to this particular resource. And how do you confirm? So let me go back to my home, back to storage account. So I've already configured the same for this cyber preacher storage account, but on a different subnet, sorry, on a different virtual network. And I've also created a virtual machine that is connected to the service to the VNet of the storage account, and I've given it a service endpoint. So now, um, but just to confirm that, I'll come to the storage account and then just show you that this is the container. Then we have this container here. Request is not permitted. So let me refresh this. I'm getting issue. Storage accounts as maybe blocking access to the storage service. Try adding your client identity. Okay, so I think the allow rule means that public can have access to this particular file, but let's try and access it from the storage, sorry, from the virtual machine. Now I'll come to the virtual machine and I'll click on the VM connected. So all I need to do is to connect to the VM through RDP. I can make it of the Bastion, but the Bastion consumes more cost. So I'll just go through the native connection. I think this is the VM here. I'm coming, one moment. Okay, so in order to happen, let's just create a fresh VM inside of the new network that we created. And let's try to save time, but it seems that is not working for the moment, and I don't want to start troubleshooting. So the same resource group, new private VM2. Okay, availability zone, no infrastructure redundancy required. We'll keep this at standard level. Then we want a Windows 10 Pro. We'll just give this a name and then put in our password. Okay, allow RDP or move to networking. Now in this networking part, we need to add this to the VNet that we just created for the service endpoint VNet. Then under the subnet, we want to make sure it's on private that has the service endpoint enabled. Then we leave the rest as default. And then we'll go to management. Okay, monitor. Let's see. Let's disable boot diagnostics and we'll review and create. There's okay. I think that is the licensing. Review and create, and it should take a little while to validate before we can create. Alright, so create. Oh, now that I'm thinking about it now, I'm not sure if I remember to start that VM before connecting to it. I think that might have been the major issue. Sometimes you have to just save cost and then you forget that you've shut down the VM, and sometimes troubleshooting can just be as basic as that. So let's come back to VM. Right. Let me refresh this. Is the deployment done? It's still deploying. So while it is deploying, let's just confirm if it is on. All right, it is actually shut down. No wonder. So let me just start this. It is already practical. So we wait for it to start. So started machine successfully, and also this has been deployed as well. So where is my Remi now? Let me try and connect to it again. Okay, it's working now. It's working. So basically, this is the uploaded blog, right? That I uploaded on that particular storage account. So if I try to access it from where is my Azure portal? If I try to access it from this guy, it should give me an error that I don't have enough authorization. Okay, sorry. Now I don't have enough authorization. But now, if I come to this VM that is inside
Yeah,
the
this one is this one.
virtual network, I come to the VM and then I paste it here
This one.
and enter. So we can see that the image actually loads. So the service endpoint allow you to have access to file share, not just container alone, but file shares in the storage accounts. As long as you configure the file share that you want to enable, or the storage or the blob that you want to upload. So as long as the VM is inside of the virtual network, they should be able to have access to the storage accounts. So, but now, what about private endpoint or private endpoint? How does that one work? And let's come back to our um, portal. Now, let's go back to our storage account. Now, private endpoint, like I said, it creates a network interface that can be attached a to a VM. Just create like a one-to-one communication. So let me come down to, let's say, server creature 01, and then I click on containers. Okay, sorry, I come to networking rather, networking. This is where we configure the internet access. Now, on the right hand side here, we can see something called the private endpoint connection. Okay, so if I click on private endpoint, it allows me to add a private endpoint to these storage accounts. So here I'm going to give it a name. Let's say the name is, I don't know, private endpoint. Already taken, let's say private storage. I think in my resource group, I already have a endpoint called private endpoint. So let's say private storage. And so you can see that it's creating a network interface card or the private storage NS that can be attached to UVM if you want to. Then we're going to click on next to resource. Now, this allows us to specify our target resource. So we want to target blob that are in the storage account. So I'll say blob, and I'll click on next for virtual network. Now I'll target the VNet that I want to affect. So ensure that you select the right VNet. For us, this is our VNet service endpoint VNet. Then we want to attach it to private. Let's attach it to private, okay. Then we're going to allow dynamic allocation of IP address to the private endpoint. And then we're going to click on DNS. So if we want to configure, so this actually automatically gives us like a DNS for the private link to the blog. Okay, so I'm going to leave this as it is. So just in case we want a private DNS, this is already there. Now we'll go to tag and then we're going to review and create. Now we're going to create the resource when it's done validating. All right, so create. So in just in a minute or two, the private endpoint should be ready. Okay, is it done? Okay, so it is done deploying. All right, so let's come back to our storage account. You know, the server picture 01. And if we come down to networking, so private endpoint, we can see that there is a private endpoint that is attached, and the description is auto approved. Okay, so now if I come down to my resource group level, resource group is not here, the resource group, and I select my resource group. So resource group shows us all the resources that have been deployed in that particular group. So we can see that there is a network interface card called private endpoints and private storage. So it creates this network interface that can be attached to a VM for access, but then it is in that particular VNet virtual network. If you come down to IP configuration, you should be able to see what virtual network it falls under, which is the service endpoint VNet, and on this particular what do we call it? Subnet, private subnet. Now let's go to our virtual machine, then to this private VM2 that we created. Let's come down to, let's click on this private subnet over here. Now, let's click on settings. I'm looking for NSG, network security group. I think it should be under uh, let's check subnet, private. No, is it here? No, I don't know. I forget this NSG location. Private VM. Okay, network interface. This. So we come to where is the network security group? All right, network security group. And now we can say there is no energy applied. So that means that I won't be able to have access to this VM through public. So let me attach this to, let's say, this particular energy and save. So that is my private energy that has the rules for allowing RDP connection. Okay, so let me come back to overview, and let me go back to the private VM. Now, if you come down to networking, to read networking or connect, sorry, one moment. Network settings. So we can see that it is connected to this particular network interface, private VM. Okay, and this private VM is inside the service endpoint VNet. Now let's go back to our storage account that we created. So on that container, sorry, under networking rather, we want to check the private endpoint. I'm sorry, one moment. Okay. So just to confirm the private endpoint, um, under settings and look at properties. So it is a HTTPS and then also is in the that VNet service endpoint VNet, same as the what do you call it? Same as the VM. So now to attach the private endpoint to the VM so that we can have a private access from the VM to the storage. All what we need to do now is to come to the VM, then select a VM that is in the virtual network. Then under networking, let's click on network settings. And you can see attach an interface, attach a network interface here. And just wait for it to load. Okay, let's press detach first. This operation can be performed on the virtual machine. Okay, let's stop it first. Then after we stop it, then we'll try again. So we refresh it and still stopping. All right, so it is off already. Now coming back to network settings, let's try and attach one more time. All right, so we can see that it is working now. Private storage NIC. So this is the NIC, the private endpoint network interface. I'm going to click on this and then click on OK to attach the network interface to this system. So attaching allows us to have a secure field to attach. Let's try again. Let me detach the current one. The no network. Sorry, one moment. So it is giving an error. Cannot use resource of the virtual machine because the NIC is linked to a private endpoint. Okay, I'm not sure about this particular issue, but let's just stop here. And I'm sure you understand the concept of the private endpoint and the service endpoint. So it basically gives a secure remote access to a particular service, be it a storage account, a what do you call it, a Cosmos DB or an Azure SQL database. And so this is where we're going to stop for today. If you have any question, just do well to send it to the chat section, and then we're going to attend to it. Over to you, Mr. Emmanuel.
Hello, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Mr. Steve. Thank you for explaining what private endpoint is and public endpoint is, and how we can use it to secure our cloud environment. A round of applause for our speaker, please. So if you have any question, you could just drop it on the chat, or you could just use a raise of hand. So once I see your hand, I can just call you to speak up. So if you have any question, please raise your hand, please. We are expecting questions. Questions. So anybody on the chat that wants to ask us question, the floor is open. Okay. So there was a question on the chat, but Emmanuel Itoje has done justice to the question. So Patrick, you can go ahead before we take the question on the chat. You can go ahead, Patrick.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're watching from. I want to say a special thanks to the presenter, Mr. Steve. I appreciate your skill and the ability to deliver, I really appreciate. So my question is this, because I would say before now, it's been M365, that's the admin center that I am well knowledgeable in. Though a bit of Azure, but the Azure I really know is the Entra admin. So not really that conversant with this Azure per se, Azure deployment environment and all that. So regarding the topic you treated, the endpoint as a topic, before now I felt is about deploying the devices. Maybe it's a platform where you can manage devices which you want to add into your organization. So this, my question is this: I would like you to reconcile this knowledge I've already got about, what I just said now with the one you've just taught us now, so that I'll be able to understand more about what you really taught us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick. I can see our MVP, Emmanuel Itoje, his hands is raised. So Emmanuel Itoje, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for a wonderful session, and Emmanuel for moderating the session. Patrick, thank you so much for the question. I was actually going to address the question before the end of the session. So I understand you're coming from M365 side of things, and in M365 we have the Entra ID, which is actually like a kind of a bridge between Microsoft 365 and Azure, because they both share the same identity directory, if I will put it like that. What we are looking at in this particular series is cloud security, focusing on Azure. So this is actually completely different from M365, okay? It is cloud security. And actually, the series, the reason why we actually started this series initially was to just get conversant with what cloud security is all about, focusing on Microsoft Azure, right? And in Microsoft Azure, definitely this is like a follow-up series to after AZ900 and AZ104, because during the session you will hear Stevens mentioning app service, Azure functions. So all those services, you're supposed to have already know them from AZ104. It is actually outside the scope of our community, because our community is really focusing on cloud security and cybersecurity. So we are not focusing on deploying infrastructure, even though we have mentors in the community that can take that. Like, for example, now, one of the things I wanted to ask, like I even asked in the chat, was I wanted to confirm if we should have a series to discuss app service, right? Because some of those things, they are actually from AZ104, which is actually being taken care of by a different community, which is our Azure Nigerian community. They take care of those parts. So we are just leveraging on the knowledge. Hopefully that we are expecting that everybody on this call have at least basic knowledge of Azure, especially from the infrastructure side of things. There is a part that is actually linked between both of them, which is the intra ID, right? It is common, but we tend to go deeper in AZ500 because it is Azure Security Engineering, not Azure Administration. So it is from Azure Administration, you'll be able to see all those services being talked about in details. However, because the community event is already planned for the entire year, right? And we know that sometimes this knowledge is actually getting very useful. That's why the sessions are recorded. It is available on our community YouTube channel for viewing anytime we want to view. So we can have a spin-off session which will not affect our current calendar, right? It might just be like a drop-in session, like maybe we'll have like a 30-minute session to talk about the service. Like for example, now on this corner, I know that if you want to talk about infrastructure, Oyimafu is an infrastructure person. He'll be more than willing to come on the call to organize a session. We want to talk about Kubernetes, talk about app services, right? He's an infrastructure person. We can do that, but it will be outside the scope of what our community is all about. But we can definitely organize such a session just to ensure that the whole thing makes sense. Because after securing networks now, the next part that we'll be moving into is to secure compute, secure storage, and also secure databases, right? So all those sessions now, it is expected that you really have understanding of what are the compute services that we have, what are the storage services that we have, what are the database services that we have, right? Because here you're just focusing on securing it. So you might not necessarily deploy those things, but because for sake of understanding, we need to deploy some of the services so you can actually see like the way Steven demo, right, on how to go about doing the configuration as it's pertaining to the security of it. So probably I'm going to create a poll. So based on the poll, if you have people that are interested for us to have such session, we can organize a mini session in which Oyimafu will just jump on it, just take us through Azure infrastructure as a whole. Then coming back to your question again, M365 is different from Azure. In fact, M365 security is different from Azure security because what we have the focus in M365 security, you're focusing on those services, Exchange Online, SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, right? How to secure those things. But in Azure, we're focusing on those services on Azure itself, networking, storage, compute, database, and the likes. Yeah, so that's the reason why it might not connect. And I know some of us on this call too, we're just coming into cloud. So it might not really make sense to us, but the community is willing to go the extra mile, even though we are having a bi-monthly sessions, we can pick 1 week to just have those sessions so that it can make sense when we jump into the main session. How that's clear?
Yeah. Thanks so much for the clarity.
All right, awesome. Yeah, Basayo, you can go ahead, yeah.
Thank you for the. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yes, thank you for the next session. Actually, I'm not a security person, but actually I'm to Azure. I'm not new to Azure and M365 both. I'm switching both, and when I'm working, I'm doing job that related to M365. But I really appreciate that's why I asked you a question that about endpoint and answer the question. Ask the question what you have answered the question actually. Because always confused. Their cancer, I always confused. I try to confuse with endpoint and with firewall and NSD. I know that both of them has to do with security to protect resources. But the question now in endpoint, are you with me, sir? Hello?
Yes, go ahead. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Just something. In endpoint, I know endpoint is only to manage devices, to manage devices. Maybe you have a device, to some device you're not allowed to endpoint not to manage some devices, maybe to allow some system not to I know that endpoint to mount to manage devices. That's my own understanding at the point. Actually, I really appreciate how to comment. Actually, I understand I need to comment for this opportunity. Actually, I don't know how to appreciate both.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So when you talk about endpoints, generally, you're talking about devices, right? So we have a different service in Microsoft that does those endpoint management, maybe mobile application management or mobile device management, right? Which is a Microsoft Intune. So Microsoft Intune is a cloud-based that does that. So I think that particular will be handled by the Nigerian security community, right? But for the security community, we might look at endpoint security, right? At some points, maybe if there is a demand for it. But Microsoft Intune as a service itself for Microsoft sits under the modern workplace. So which is M365, right? So endpoint management generally maybe SCCM, System Center Configuration, which used to be the on-prem version, or that can actually be integrated with the Intune itself to manage devices, whether you have servers on-prem, right? You have servers on-prem, you have devices in that is joined, right? Hybrid, maybe they're hybrid, they're registered, or they are just cloud only device, right? You can manage them with Intune. All right. I see another question in the chat. Okay, Stephen, there's a question from Theodora for you. What's the difference between private service endpoint and private link? Do you want to take that?
The difference between private service endpoint and private link. Is this private endpoint? There's private endpoint, and then there is service endpoint, and then there is private link. Okay, let me just explain the three together. So, service endpoint is on the subnet level, and it allows devices from a particular subnet to have access to to a service like the storage, the SQL. So basically, it creates like this secure private network for your VMs to have access to the storage or to the database through the backbone, that is through private network, not from the global internet, not like using the public IP address. That is the service endpoint. So it's VMs on a particular subnet in a virtual network. Then we have the private endpoint, which allows you to create a private network interface card, still on the backbone, still on the private layer. So basically, for the service endpoint, the services still have no public internet access. So some companies might not want to have that particular database to still have like a public, connectivity. So they can go ahead and create like a private endpoint that just takes it to private, and it it creates a network interface card that can be attached to private endpoint to allow secure private access. So that does not have like a public access. So it basically uses Microsoft backbone, and if you want to have access to it, you have to make sure that the device that have access to the private endpoint is used to have access to that storage or database. The private link is the link that is created when you are connecting to private endpoints. I think that is the best I can answer it. If you have anything extra to add, Mr. Emmanuel, please you can go ahead and add to it.
I mean, you already given the right answer. So today I'm going to share a link with you where you can do further reading on those three, so you can get more details directly. All right. I think there's a question from Aki. Aki said there's a developer environment for M365 to practice. Well, how do I get Azure to practice? I don't have money to purchase subscription. Please. All right. Thank you for Cedra. Thank you for confirming that. So, okay. So based on our region where we are now, there's a challenge in the sense that Microsoft provided the developer environment to practice for M365, but for Azure, so Azure is like it's pay as you use. But if you have a MasterCard, a dollar card, I mean, or even this Providence Bank Naira card, if you have their Platinum card, you can create an Azure environment, right, that you can use for 30 days. That's just the limitation. I said maybe after the 30 days, you want to use another email to create another one. Like, so that's like a kind of limitations for now. So you can just create an environment that will give you 200 Azure credit, I think. Yeah. Then the other way is to, okay, which of the card did you have? Is it the dollar card? With this dollar card, I think they were having issues some weeks ago because I was checking. Yeah, go ahead, Akin. Yeah.
It's Naira card.
Naira card will not work. Naira card will not work. The only Naira card that will work is the Platinum, Providence Bank Platinum card. That's the only Naira card that can work. But you have to get a DOM account that will give you a dollar card or an euro card. Those two will work for you.
Okay,
Yes.
if I may ask also, I've heard of a Hyper-V machine. Can we use that one to practice? Will that one work for us?
Hyper-V is on your on-prem. It's something you can do on your Windows system. But we're talking about Azure. Azure is in the cloud,
The
right? So
cloud.
there are two different things. Except if you need a VM, of course, Hyper-V can work for you just for a VM. We are talking
Okay.
about securing the cloud, right? So it has to be on Azure
I
or any
understand.
of the other cloud services, right? Yeah.
I understand. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. So again, thank you everyone for joining. So we need your feedbacks, right? The thing is that the leadership of the communities have tried to design a calendar for the year, but we need those feedbacks coming in from you guys. What topics you think we can talk about? Like off my head now, I'm looking at, because you're in the age of AI security, right? It's one of the things we plan, but it's going to be towards later part of the year because we want to try to see how we can, complete the AZ500 Azure Security Engineer series, right? After the series, so we're going to expand it into some other areas, like there'll be a series for a different series for security operations. For those that want to go into SOC analysis, I'm talking about SC200. We'll be looking at different Defender suite of products. Defender for identity, Defender for endpoint, Defender HDR, right? All those Defender suite of products, we'll be looking at them, but that'll be much later. But we need your feedback, right? Give us feedback, drop in if you're not in the WhatsApp group, I've posted the link to our WhatsApp group. We are always monitoring those WhatsApp group for feedback. So if you have feedback for us, something we can include in a series, if you have suggestions for us, if you want us to organize a conference, it could be a physical conference, a virtual conference, if you want us to do kind of an hackathon, right? Please feel free to drop those feedback. We really appreciate those feedback so that the leadership can actually look into those things and see how we can bring in stuffs for us to grow our community. Cybersecurity, cloud security is a growing market, right? It's a market that even AI cannot even, can't say AI is, when they are saying AI will take your job, it's not a field that AI will take, because professionals are always needed. Professionals are always in demand in this field. So please, those feedbacks, we need them. Help us with those feedback. Money, I'm giving your mic back to you, Oyimafu.
Okay, thank you very much, MVP in the house, and thank you for your awesome contribution. We really, really appreciate. We really appreciate, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So feel free to drop any feedback you have on our WhatsApp group chat, and we'll be happy to take it, because we actually need your feedback so that we can serve you guys better and do more. So want to end the section now. So we wish everyone a happy weekend. Thank you for
Please,
joining us
1 minute,
today.
I beg.
Yeah. So,
Please, yeah,
Theodora, you're not muted.
yeah,
Do you have a question?
yes, I dropped a question now, but let me just say it.
Okay.
Mr. Emmanuel talked about videos on AZ 900 and AZ 104. I don't know if I can get the link to those videos.
Okay, probably I will check our Azure Nigerian community YouTube channel if they have some videos there. I know probably they're having plans to have some meetups around it. I'll check that and I'll share on the group for you on the WhatsApp group. I'll share it for you there so you can check some videos. But again, if you just type is it 900 or is it 104 on YouTube, there are a lot of videos on them that you can watch.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you very much, MVP. And thank you, Theodora. So thank you, everyone. We'll be ending the call now. So thank you for joining us. Bye for now.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.